Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hello, and thank you for watching.
For the past few weeks, Central Square has played host to public property as that we have a tragedy of the commons issue, saying happy holidays, King.
Voluntary interactions where individuals are free to act so long as they don't initiate force.
This morning, we gather to remember Sergeant Tom Ball.
Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Johnny Ray. This past week, Free Keene TV's producer was at the Porcupine Freedom Festival and recorded roughly 59 hours of footage covering speeches, panels, music, and comedy events. The footage is not ready to be shown yet, but rest assured you will be able to see some of it on this channel in the near future. Nearly 100 activists, including dozens from Keene, gathered in the pouring rain in Middleborough, Massachusetts today to protest a cursing fine. The ordinance passed earlier this month at a Middleborough town meeting with a vote of 183 to 50. While the Supreme Court has ruled that public speech cannot be infringed due to offensive language, Massachusetts state law passed a bylaw in 1968 which made profanity an arrestable offense. The bylaw was enforced only one time over the years due to the costs, time, and difficulty prosecuting such matters that many would view as blatantly unconstitutional. David Mashesky of the Middleborough PD is presently using such loopholes in the law to make swearing in public punishable by way of a $20 fine. Enforcement of this ordinance is on hold while Attorney General Martha Coakley determines the constitutionality of such a ban. The good news is the Attorney General won't have to dig very far as it is conveniently placed number 1 among the first 10 amendments in the freedom of speech category. This past week, New Hampshire Governor John Lynch signed into law a bill that reinforces a jury's right to judge the application of a law relative to the facts in controversy. Representative Dan Itzy is credited by some as the key player in HB 146's passage. Also known as jury nullification, this has been a part of common law for hundreds of years. The bill specifically grants the defendant the ability to tell the jury about their right to nullify a law that seems tyrannical, ill-fitting, or unjust. Prior to this bill, some New Hampshire judges would find the defendant or their counsel in contempt of court and jail them for telling the jury about this right. The fact that such a bill is needed is an indictment against the court system and their supposed impartial nature. The practice of silencing those who would speak to jurors' rights is a common one. Julian Heiklin is famous for touring the country and distributing fully informed jury pamphlets to anyone entering a courthouse. After numerous arrests and facing charges from several states and the federal government, the 80-year-old retired professor chose to flee the country rather than continue to be persecuted. For the remainder of the show, we have a topic-focused selection of videos. Public sector unions have been in the news a lot lately, so our producers thought these points may be valuable for some. Thank you for watching. Questions or comments? Send us an email at tv@freekeene.com. I'm Johnny Ray, wishing you only the best.
Hey everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. So, this is a nag cast. Recession-plagued states have diverted scarce money away from pensions to pay off for more immediate concerns, leaving an almost $800 billion hole in the retirement funds, covering millions of public employees. 34 states have failed to maintain safe levels of money in the pension funds, which most experts agree is about 80% of long-term obligations. It's made up by investments and profits and so on. 4 states, Connecticut, Illinois, Kentucky, and Rhode Island, don't even have 55% of the money they'll need in the long run. This is if we even count the money that they've got invested in federal treasury bonds as money, which is just a big IOU. So, this is all for the most recent figure is 2010. Now, of course, a lot of these funds blew up in the crash of 2007 to, well, infinity. And they're trying to address the funding gap by cutting benefits for future employees or requiring workers to pay more of their own money into their retirement funds. And so some of them, of course, have gone after the benefits for employees, which have triggered court battles. And, of course, governments have regularly robbed pension funds. I mean, the whole Social Security scheme is a Ponzi scheme. Governments have regularly raided all of these long-term funds because politicians want to bribe people in the here and now. And what do they care what happens 20 or 30 years from now when they're either dead or certainly out of power? Pensions aren't the only retirement problem. States also faced a $627 billion shortfall in healthcare services for retirees. Essentially, for every $1 the states will have to pay out in healthcare costs, they have set aside only 5 cents. 5 cents on the dollar. And this is okay. 22.5 million public sector workers fall under these pension plans. What are they going to do? Are they going to tax the young? Young weren't even born when these decisions were made. This is economic abortion of their futures. And this is wretched. Illinois has got the worst funding level at only 45%. Officials say fixing the problem is a top priority. But a proposal to cut cost of living increases for current employees and retirees has stalled in the General Assembly. Pensions are the biggest mountain we have to climb, Governor Pat Quinn, a Chicago Democrat, said Monday. So from 2009 to 11, 43 states cuts benefits for future employees, not current employees, future employees, required them to pay more or did both, and 6 states took similar action in 2012. So it's all nonsense and madness. And, of course, the public sector employees are going to clamor and claim that we must pay them, or it is disastrous morally, financially, and probably practically as they storm the streets and throw bottles and block traffic. But it's all nonsense. People who think that if they go to the state, they can somehow bypass or eliminate the reality of risk are dreaming. You cannot eliminate the reality of risk. You can put all of your eggs in one government basket. These are wonderful governments, as you can see, how much they care for the poor, how much they care for the education of the young, how effective they are at fighting drugs. It's all wonderful, how wonderfully peaceful and benevolent the foreign policy is, how great foreign aid has been for everyone in lifting countries out of poverty. So if you put your faith in the government, you do not eliminate risk. You simply put all of your eggs in one basket. Now, are people responsible for this? Of course they're responsible for it. You know, when I was a kid, if I failed to study for a test when I was 7 or 8 years old, I got an F. I got an F. Even if I'd forgotten the test was coming, no matter what chaos was going on in my house, if I was unprepared for a test, well, I failed. Fail enough of those tests, they'll take away a year of your life by making you repeat an entire grade. Or you don't get into college, which is going to cost you hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost earnings over your lifetime. So I feel that if children at the age of 5 or 6 or 7 have these iron rules about consequences for a lack of knowledge or a lack of preparation, I pretty much think that 50 to 60 to 70-year-olds, I think it's fair that we apply the same moral standards that are inflicted on children to adults with all of their knowledge and independence and education and preparation. So this funding shortfall, the national debt, has been known by everyone forever. I remember when I was, I think 12 or 13, we got a long lecture on the Canada pension plan here, and my friends and I, who were not economically literate at the time, we laughed. We literally laughed, and there was quite a lot of laughter in the class, the idea that, you know, in 50-plus years, this money was all going to be here for us. It was all nonsense. We could not take it even remotely seriously. So this is all scurvy nonsense. Crazy stuff that people have only pretended to believe in order to pillage the unborn and the future. Okay, first of all, we need to care a hell of a lot more about our children. Oh, we listen to Whitney Houston, I believe the children are the future, and how wonderful they are, and children are everything, and they're the leaders of tomorrow, and all the commencement speeches in the world come flowing down our brains like the molten lava of future animal husk sales on the foreign markets of banksters. We've got to care a little bit more about our kids, people. We've got to live the values we espouse, which means, look, you all got to take some hits. The public sector workers, you've got to take some hits. You're responsible. You're responsible. This stuff has all been known for a long time. You have played into the system. You have ignored the reality, or you have bypassed the reality, or you've pretended not to know the reality. And look, everyone, what's it, 1/3 of Americans claim to have read Ayn Rand. Libertarians are 10 to 20% plus of the population. So odds are, in your storied life, in your extendo life, you have met or run up against a libertarian or two, or an objectivist or two, or a voluntarist or two. And so these ideas, these ideals, these problems, these solutions, this analysis has been available to you, and you have probably rolled your eyes and called Ayn Rand names, or called libertarians crazy conspiracy nuts, or called the idea of a voluntary society completely impractical and irrational. Well, actions have consequences. This was inflicted and taught on me when I was 6 years old. Now that you people are 60, it's pretty much bouncing back on you. You are responsible for this mess, and you're going to have to take some hits. Not because I'm mean, not because anyone else is mean, but because reality is reality. And it is not the fault of the young that you put your eggs in one basket. It is not the fault of the unborn that you are hoping to pillage as much as possible. You have to put aside that selfishness. I mean, you just have to. You have to be some people that we can even remotely admire as a society, because the old become dependent upon the young and the middle-aged. And if you're just a bunch of greedy, hungry hippos, carving off the spleens, kidneys, and futures of the young, then that's not really such a great and admirable thing for us as a society as a whole to see. So, man up, woman up, recognize that you rolled the dice in the casino called the state. You came up snake eyes, which has been utterly statistically predictable for decades and decades. Anyone who claims ignorance of this is clearly unable to tie their shoelaces and walk out through a closed door without bumping their face, and so we don't need to worry about them. If you've made it out of the door and your shoes aren't currently tied to an aardvark or together, then you have known about this for a long time. And you can pull a Wisconsin, you get all kinds of mad and upset and so on, but you handed your money to a bunch of thugs. And now, when they've blown it on hooker's blow and voting bribery, can you really claim to be surprised? I guess you can, but it just looks so silly.
You know about the protests in Wisconsin this winter, but did you know that they continue?
They say you need no union if your collar isn't blue. Well, that is just another lie the boss is telling you.
Every day, union supporters still gather inside the Capitol and sing protest songs. This man sang about collectivism.
I thought collectivism didn't work.
The whole country functions on collectivism.
How much money does it save, Governor? Just
that particular part doesn't save any.
Okay.
And the battle for Wisconsin's also being fought in Washington.
That's right.
In the same way that
That's
if you,
the point.
if you read the federal budget,
no effect whatsoever.
I'll answer your question.
The man the congressmen and unions are mad at is Governor Scott Walker. He won the governor's race by complaining that government and unions were throwing money down a hole.
And long term, you just can't sustain that.
Walker asked them to pay a little more of their pension and health care costs, still less than private sector workers pay. But the union said no.
Somehow they were entitled to a fixed standard of living and a fixed compensation package.
The unions eventually said, okay, they'd pay more of their benefits, but Walker also wanted to rein in their power to get future benefits.
If you don't have a permanent change, they can come back 2 years from now with a new contract and jack up health care costs for the taxpayers.
What do you mean jack it up? You can say no.
Your hands are tied.
We want justice! How about you?
Tied, he says, by collective bargaining rules. So Walker moved to limit those.
If you're under a collective bargaining agreement, no matter what the financial situation of that local government or the state government is, the unions don't have to budge.
They don't have to budge because government has no real competition. Governments, unlike private businesses, don't go out of business when they overspend.
If the private sector, an employer can say, if we don't do this, we're going to move our operations to another location. And then people have to decide whether it's worth risking that. But the difference is in government, you got nowhere to go.
He wants to take away workers' rights to collectively bargain.
John Erpenbach is one of the 14 Democratic state senators who fled Wisconsin to try to stop the legislature from passing Governor Walker's bill. That won the union's adoration. Listen to what happens when we walk to where the protesters can see the senator.
The actual action of collective bargaining, the language of collective bargaining, doesn't save or spend money one way or the other. In the end, it's whatever governor's administration.
Wait a second. I mean, if you can collectively bargain,
Right.
you can get more stuff. That's why they fight for it.
Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't.
The current system is rigged to create a vicious cycle. Money goes from taxpayers to government workers, to dues to the union, and then from the union to the politicians who promise to do more for the government workers. Round and round.
You Democrats give kickbacks to unions that elected you.
What kind of kickbacks? Like what?
Good pension, extra good pensions.
It's a good pension. There's no doubt about that. It's stuff they negotiated.
It's a kickback for electing
No,
you.
it's the stuff they've negotiated over the years with Democrat administrations and Republican administrations. The reason why public employees support me is, number one, I support what they're doing.
He supports union leaders like Malin Mitchell. Mitchell heads the firefighters union.
You elect your own bosses. You contribute to the Democrats, and then the Democrats pay you back with a good deal. They want to take that power away. I can kind of see why.
We're a nonpartisan union. We contribute to Republicans as well as Democrats.
But I'm looking at the list here, public sector unions, political donations. 92% to Democrats last year.
And that's because we contribute to members or people that are with our issues. And generally, the Democratic way are with our issues.
So that doesn't sound very nonpartisan.
Well, if the Republicans come back to the good side of town, then we'll start contributing more money to them.
Governor Walker isn't holding his breath.
Would America be better off without unions?
Certainly in the public sector. I mean, it's why Franklin...
What's the difference? Public-private.
President Roosevelt, who obviously is no slouch when it comes to Democrats and unions, said that public sector unions would be a problem for the United States.
Even FDR says they shouldn't have collective bargaining rights. But the public, when you do polls today, you're the evil guy who took away their rights.
The unions poured $4 or $5 million into TV ads and talked about rights.
There's a radical move underway in Madison to roll back the rights of our trusted public employees.
This is about our rights.
Collective bargaining rights. Taking away of union rights is not right.
People hear the word rights on almost anything, human rights, civil rights, union rights, collective bargaining rights. People like rights. This is really an expensive entitlement.
This happened in Puerto Rico 2 years ago. Thousands of union members clashed with police for days. They protested in front of the governor's mansion because they were upset that their new governor proposed cuts far bigger than Wisconsin's. But the governor just smiled and waved. Luis Fortunio says he had to make cuts because Puerto Rico's economy was a mess.
Not just a mess. We didn't have enough money to meet our first payroll.
Agrícola de Puerto Rico.
Fortunio's predecessors had grown Puerto Rico's government to the point that 1 out of every 3 workers worked for the state. And the state was generous about giving out contracts.
They couldn't care. You know, the vendors will raise the prices, and they would just sign the contracts because it was not their money. It was the taxpayers' money.
As a result, by the time Fortunio was elected, Puerto Rico was broke. Fortunio decided the government would handle money differently.
We had to handle it as if it was our own money.
The new conservative majority, the first in Puerto Rico in 40 years, passed Law 7, which shrank the state.
So what'd you cut? Everything. I started with my own salary. I froze all salaries across the government.
People must have screamed. You let 17,000 workers go.
If you can't pay their salaries, what are you going to do?
People called him a fascist, and worse, they said he should raise taxes instead of cutting government. We've heard that before.
Our taxes, as it is, were as high as they could be, actually much higher than in most of the country. So what we've done is the opposite.
He reduced corporate taxes from 35 to 25%. He reduced individual income taxes, and he privatized entire government agencies.
Bring in the private sector. They will do a better job. They will do it cheaper.
But government workers lost jobs.
The unions hate you.
Of course, they felt threatened.
Well, they were threatened. You cut 17,000 jobs.
Some of them wanted to work with us and lowered the government expenses, and some of them did and saved jobs. Others refused and lost jobs.
One fired government employee threw an egg at the governor.
You ducked. I ducked. But bottom line here is, you know, they will try to push back at the right decisions, because a lot of people will rather stay comfortable in the comfort zone and not do what needs to be done.
The governor also cut his government's red tape. There was a lot of that, and that made it hard to open a business.
28 different business regulations and permits to open.
Crazy. Today we've got one regulation. That's it.
Didn't bureaucrats say, oh no, we need all these steps?
Of course they did. There's a permanent government.
A permanent government. That's common everywhere. Government employs hundreds of thousands of people, often just to shuffle paper, and those people lobby to keep their jobs. Like the police officers who did nothing but approve liquor licenses.
There were 250 policemen and women handling that.
Just liquor licenses?
Just to guarantee that you didn't have a prior record, criminal record.
This entrepreneur's mad because to sell marmalade out of her house, she had to spend a year getting government permits. She displays some on her wall. Even though her business is in her home, government rules required her to have an accessible bathroom. This woman's full-time job is helping businesses, mostly restaurants, wade through the maze.
I said, you cook and I take care of the government, and don't worry.
And now the new permit office says the rules are much easier.
It's helpful to have everything in one place.
Now she says it takes just 2 weeks to get permission to open a small store.
How about a copy of Give Me a Break?
This is my version of that. This one was in Delaware.
You want to buy a Fox t-shirt?
Delaware was said to be the most business-friendly state, but it still took me a week to get permission to do this. In Hong Kong, it took just 1 day.
Thank you, sir.
So the 2-week wait in Puerto Rico is still a handicap, but it's much faster than it used to be.
Do you hear now from businesses responding to that?
Of course. Walmart is expanding significantly, and Costco.
600 construction permits were issued in the first few months after the new rules went into effect. This drug company is expanding.
We're going to get more employees, up to 450 employees.
Coca-Cola's begin construction on a Dasani bottling plant that'll employ thousands.
There are a number of restaurants are coming in from the mainland.
Did you ever have a fired worker come to you and say, Governor, you know, I worked in the bureaucracy for 20 years. I would have never left. You fired me, but now I'm glad because I'm doing...
Of course.
People like that woman selling marmalade. She used to work for the government, keeping historical records. Being fired was hard.
I feel bad because I have a big family.
But now that she started her own business, she says getting fired was a good thing.
I am my boss.
So good, she named her company Law 7, after the law that fired her.
It's good. For me, it's good.
And now, if a bar wants a liquor license...
Today you do it online.
One clerk on a computer.
Exactly, and that's it. So we have those policemen and women out in the streets where they belong.
Still, lots of people are mad, especially the government workers who lost jobs. A recent poll showed that if Fortunio ran for re-election now, he'd lose 47 to 25%. Fortunio says, so what?
I don't need this job. I'm doing it because I want to do it.
What do you mean when you say, I don't need this job?
I come from the private sector. I enjoyed what I was doing. I really enjoyed what I was doing.
You can go back to that.
And I can go back to that.
And over time, Puerto Rican voters may come to like his conservative government.
Thank you very much.
Ronald Reagan's popularity suffered when he made cuts. So did Richard Engler's in Michigan and Gary Johnson's in New Mexico. But all were later re-elected by big margins.
I didn't care to look at those numbers because I knew how it was going to be. And I was in Washington in the President Reagan's first term. I know how unpopular he was during the first 2 years. But he was doing a lot of the right stuff. And at the end of the day, the numbers came back, and he won by a landslide.
Fortunio's advice to leaders who want to shrink the state?
Do what you need to do quickly, swiftly, like when you take off a Band-Aid, you know, just do it. And move on to better things.
Now,
with all this strife that's going on in Wisconsin, Indiana, New Jersey, and there are indications of more to come in other places, it's probably time to shed a little bit of light on unions as an economic unit. I support freedom of association. I support a person's right to be a member of a labor union, and I support a person's right not to be a member of a labor union. Now, from my point of view, and from many, many Americans' point of view, I believe, the only controversy regarding unions is what they should be permitted and not permitted to do. Now, let's look at a few statistics. According to the Department of Labor, most union members today work for state and local governments and the federal government. Matter of fact, 40% of public employees are unionized. And as such, they represent a powerful political force in elections. Now, if you are a candidate for governor, a candidate for mayor, or city council, you surely want the votes and campaign contributions from public employee unions. That's no problem. The problem arises after you win office and sit down to bargain over pay and working conditions with unions who voted for you. That's a big problem. And matter of fact, Chris Christie, he says unions are talking about the sanctity of collective bargaining. And Mr. Christie said he had no plans to take away collective bargaining rights in New Jersey. But collective bargaining is not the way unions go when they don't get what they want. What they do, if they fail to get what they want through collective bargaining, they go to the legislators who they help put in office, and they get what they cannot get at the bargaining table. So given the relationship between politicians and public employee unions, we should not be surprised that public employee wages and benefits often average 45% higher than their counterparts in the private sector. Often they receive pension and health care benefits to which they make little or no contribution. Now you might say, well, how is it that public employee unions have such a leg up on their private sector brethren? Well, the answer is not rocket science. That is, employers in the private sector have a bottom line. And if they overcompensate their employees, company profits are going to sink. The company might even face bankruptcy. But the kind of bottom line that exists in the private arena, the private sector, that is the bottom line of profits, does not exist in the government sector.